Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, I'd like to share with you my thoughts on the Pillsbury attack, one of the most dangerous attacks invented by Pillsbury around the end of the 19th century. The game I'll show you is one played by Pillsbury against Marco in Paris in 1900. And this is how the game started. d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6. This is the traditional Queen's Gambit declined, which of course is the opening where it most commonly occurs, the Pillsbury attack, although time to time it arises from different starting moves. White played bishop g5, pinning black's knight, a typical move, and black responded by unpinning the knight, bishop e7, the most common response, e3, opening the diagonal of white's light squared bishop, and of course protecting the pawn on c4 at the same go. And black has just castled. As expected, white played knight f3. Here today, the most common move for black would be to play h6, to ask the white bishop whether it wants to retreat to h4 or prefers to trade for the knight. It's slightly inferior what black chose in this game, to play immediately b6. Having the pawn on h6 can be advantageous for various reasons for black. For one, that just in case there may be a back rank problem, black wouldn't need to worry about it. Also, the bishop is a bit less active on h4 than it would be on g5. And also, in some other variations, there are some tactical reasons why it's better to insert for black that pair of moves of h6 and bishop h4. White continued by developing the bishop to d3, and black responded developing by bishop b7. Very standard developing move. And now here we go to the Pillsbury setup by pawn takes. And here black would have an option to take back with the knight, perhaps a slightly better one than with the pawn as they did. And now this is the beginning of the Pillsbury attack. Remember this pawn structure, and white would play knight e5, followed by f4, and oftentimes queen f3, queen h3. And black played knight b2 d7 and f4. The idea is that after black would trade on e5, white actually could recapture with either pawn, both giving white pretty nice position. If you capture with the f pawn, the f file opens up for white's rook after obviously white castles. Or if white recaptures with the d pawn, the e and f pawns advancing quickly again gives white a nice attack. Looking at the position from black's perspective, it's advisable for black to look at opportunities. In fact, black could even right now, immediately, play knight e4. That's the key defensive move against the Pillsbury attack. Had black played that right away in this case, black would have been okay. For example, after bishop takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, queen takes, and if white castles, black could choose between playing f6 immediately or playing knight f6 with the idea to then playing c5. The position is still playable for white, but the advantage is not clear. Let's go back to the actual game, where black did not jump into e4 immediately, but played c5, which is a very typical move, trying to counterattack in the middle of the board. White responded simply by castling. And here already, Black made a serious strategical mistake. In this position, Black already should have focused in on the e4 square, and Black's best option was to trade pawns on d4, followed by jumping into e4 with the knight while he can. Instead, Black played c4, which oftentimes is a wrong idea against the Pillsbury attack. If you look at this position, it's clear that White needs to move the bishop away, and the question is where? White has 4 reasonable squares to move to, but in reality only 2 of them are good. It should be clear that the bishop needs to remain on the b1 and h7 diagonal to continue participating in the attack on the king's side against Black's king. Therefore, moving the bishop back to e2 would be a move to make only if the other moves remaining on that diagonal would result in losing material. But since in this case, White doesn't need to worry about that, White should only look at moves remaining on the b1 h7 diagonal. Also, moving the bishop back all the way to b1 should be out of question because that would lock in the rook on a1. So the other 2 moves left to consider is to move to f5 or of course to c2, which is the most natural move, and that's the move that Pillsbury chose in the game. I have to add though that bishop f5 is not a bad move either. And now Black played a6, trying to follow up with his plan started by c4, which is to advance the b pawn forward, trying to on one hand chase the white knight away from c3, and on the other hand, after that, to create a passed pawn along the c-file. Now White could have chosen a more preventive play by playing a4, preventing b5, but in reality there is no need for it. Pillsbury continued with his famous attack, bringing the queen around to h3, which as we'll see will create a lot of serious and immediate threats. Black continued to advance the pawn to b5, and White is ready to move the queen to h3. Black is under serious threat already. Black at the moment does not have the time to continue with his plan by advancing the b pawn because White has serious threat on the h7 square. While White obviously cannot checkmate by queen takes pawn right away, White can capture the knight on d7, threatening on the following move to take the knight with a check and then checkmate, and if the black queen would recapture, then White would capture the pawn on h7. If knight captures bishop, obviously the black queen is lost. And after king h8, on the other hand, the discovery with bishop f5 guarantees the win for White. Let's see a couple of other options for Black instead of b4 and instead of the game move. What would happen if the black knight would remove the white knight from e5? Well, while White could capture with the f pawn, it's much better in this case to capture with the d pawn. Attacking the knight now can only move to one square, avoiding the checkmate on h7, namely moving into e4. And now try to figure out how can White move and win a piece. It's a good little exercise that involves an intermediate moves and a series of forced moves and exchanges. And the answer to that small question was knight takes knight, very important, the move order, Now, if the black bishop captures on g5, white can force checkmate immediately with knight f6 followed by checkmate. And after pawn takes knight, white has an important intermediate move, attacking black's queen, and when that queen moves, only then trading the bishops, and now the rook is in the right place to get into d7 and win the black bishop on b7. Therefore, as we saw, black could not trade on e5 in this moment without loss of material. It would also walking into white's trap if black would play h6. And this is also very, very common in the Pillsbury attack. Here, white would choose to first trade on d7, or even better, just immediately capture the pawn on h6. And if black would capture back, queen captures, and white would simply bring his rook out to the third rank, and black would be in a hopeless situation. Let's go back again. Here we go. So because the above variations that we just saw, black chose to play a very unpleasant move when you have to make it, that is to play g6. Of course, not having a bishop on g7, even visually it's painful to weaken those dark squares such as g7 and h6 right in front of black's king. Now another thing that's rather important is, from white's perspective, that you need to play aggressively, and there is no time to waste before black could recover and get his counterplay in by playing b4. The correct move here is to play f5 and indeed try to destroy the defensive chain of pawns that black has in front of his king. It's obvious that if pawn takes and bishop takes, that only helps white's cause. Therefore, black continued with his plan, playing b4. And this is one of those situations when white does not need to react to black's attack and move the knight away, but can proceed with his attack by capturing on g6. If in this position black would capture the knight, the easiest win is to remove the guard of the h7 square, namely by rook takes, threatening with immediate checkmate on h7, and if knight takes, bishop takes, again removing the knight, the defender of the h7 pawn, and at this stage black is lost because after f takes g, when black would still maintain material advantage for the moment, but white checkmates by playing queen e6. Let's go back again. After f takes g, if black responds by f-pawn capturing back, it again allows the white queen to appear on e6 with a rather unpleasant check, because after king g7, knight d7, black is losing too much material, as queen cannot recapture now without losing the queen, because bishop would take the knight on f6 and then the queen would be hanging. Let's go back again and look at this position where black now captured back with the h-pawn in the game. And let's see how the game continued, even though white didn't play the most energetic way he could have. As I mentioned time over time, first always look at forceful moves. Forceful moves typically include either checking your opponent's king, capturing one of your opponent's pieces, or attacking a strong piece of your opponent. In this case, white should have immediately continue by capturing on d7. If black recaptures with the queen, white could trade again, another forceful move, and then simply bishop takes bishop, leaving white already with an extra bishop, in addition to attacking the rook on f8 as well as black's pawn on b4. If now black would capture the white knight, now white would capture the black rook on f8, leaving white with significant material advantage. Let's go back. And in this position, after knight d7, which was the most accurate move for white, if on the other hand black recaptures with the knight and not the queen, then white has a nice combination by playing bishop g6. And after pawn takes, queen e6 check, followed by bishop e7, giving white a big advantage. However, even Pillsbury's move didn't spoil the game when he played queen h4. It just made it a little bit more difficult to win. Black accepted the knight finally and captured it. Came knight takes knight, queen takes, and now not bishop takes knight, but a very smart move, rook takes knight. Of course, if bishop takes rook, bishop takes bishop, and then the typical checkmate on h8 is unsolvable. If now black would take the pawn on b2, attacking white's other rook, white would simply move the rook a to f1 and continuing with the attack. Black's position is still lost here, and he tried playing a5, trying to get defense from the side by getting the rook to a6. To avoid that from happening, white was best off to immediately sacrifice the bishop, threatening with checkmate on h7, and after pawn takes, rook takes check, king f7, rook f1, king e8, rook takes f8, bishop takes, and now a quiet move that wins the game, queen h5, creates a threat of discovery against which black does not have any real good defense, as after queen f7, white would win immediately thanks to rook e6. Pillsbury missed this opportunity as well, but yet still won the game. He played rook a to f1, doubling up his rooks, and making the threat of bishop takes g6 even stronger. His opponent responded by rook a6, but that didn't stop him from still playing bishop g6, pawn takes, rook, bishop takes, and now the final blow, a beautiful combination. Bishop is being taken by rook f8, king f8. Black resigned already, by the way, after rook takes bishop, because the check and another check comes, and black can avoid checkmate on the following move only by giving up his own queen. A very brilliant game by Pillsbury, even if he made some inaccuracies towards the end of the game, but gives you a perfect idea on how powerful the Pillsbury attack can be. Next, I'd like to share with you one of my own games where I used what I learned from Pillsbury to my own benefit. And here is my game that I played in Switzerland in 1987. I'm gonna just brush through the opening moves and then get to the key position. As you see, this game started with different starting moves than Pillsbury's game. Nevertheless, the ideas were very similar. I keep developing, and black has a rather similar setup as in the previous game. And in this case, I felt there was even no urgency to castle, as the center of the board is rather closed, but I could bring my queen out to f3. I wanted to make sure the black knight will no longer have the opportunity to jump to e4. My opponent played knight to bd7 and my queen appeared on h3. There is no immediate threat yet, because after knight takes knight on d7, black queen could still recapture, leaving the black knight on f6 guarding the h7 square. So, for a moment, black could indeed afford to play rook e8, perhaps with the idea to bring the knight to f8 in one moment, guarding the h7 pawn. I responded by playing rook to d1, which can be important in situations when the black knight appears indeed on e4, and I would want to trade there and then trade pawns on c5 and have a pin on the d file. And here my opponent, just as in the Pillsbury game, made the wrong game plan by closing the center by playing c4. That means a very sad future for black's bishop on b7. I simply retreated my bishop and he played b5. All of that is nice, but a bit too slow for black. I played knight d to f3, and here black should have used the opportunity to play knight e4, and then my advantage would be minimal. Instead, he played g6, which is a losing move. Try to figure out how I decided the game immediately. And here it came. Played knight f7, in view that if king takes knight, now not queen e6, which looks beautiful in case black captures it, because I would checkmate with knight g5, but actually black is doing quite okay after king g7 in this position. But instead, the beautiful queen e6, the more practical and much better knight g5 check, gives white a winning advantage. If the black king now moves to one of the dark squares, white would fork immediately by knight captures on e6. On the other hand, after king g8, queen e6 check would come, and after king g7, queen f7, king h8, knight e6, black would lose their queen. In the game, my opponent continued by moving his queen away to b6 and protecting the pawn on e6. Of course, at this stage, I could simply retreat my knight and be happy with an extra pawn, but in such situations, oftentimes there is more than that. And that was the case here too. Another nice combination followed, because if pawn would take, white would checkmate in two moves by check and knight g5. My opponent did not capture my bishop, but played rook f8 instead, and then after knight 3 to g5 recognized that the position is hopeless, as after pawn would take the bishop, queen h8 would checkmate. And finally, let's see the jewel of the week. Here we go. This amazing endgame has been composed, in fact it's only the end of the endgame. It's really hard to find a solution from all the way the beginning. So this is only the easy part, so to say, by Kazantsev. Black has a clear material advantage, yet white can force either checkmate or major win of material. As usual, try to figure out the solution for yourself. You'll be really thrilled if you can find the correct solution. Then come back and see if you got it right. Here is the correct answer. White first gives up his knight by making a fork, so if the black pawn does not capture the knight, of course white just wins the queen. Following it up with a second sacrifice by giving up the bishop, Again, if black doesn't capture, white will be just a rook ahead. Black captures, and comes king d5, discover check. Black gets out of the check. White continues with another check. King f5. And now only 3 more moves to checkmate. Another sacrifice, just a little pawn this time, making sure the g4 square will be blocked by black's pawn. Now pawn advancing is not a checkmate because the f4 square would be available then for the black king. And the beautiful final sacrifice of the rook ensures that on the 7th move, white little pawn will checkmate. Another amazing endgame. Well, I hope you enjoyed this beautiful puzzle. And of course, remember the Pillsbury attack is a real dangerous one. You may want to employ it yourself. And of course, on the other side, if your opponent tries it against you, keep in mind that typically the best defense against it is to try to play knight e4 relatively early on. Thank you for listening. So long until next week.